Rescue efforts have failed after the rapid loss that reached about $100 billion in outflows and sent share prices crashing, having closed down First Republic Bank, setting history as the second largest bank failure in U.S. history and the third U.S. bank failure since March. First Republic Bank has been closed by regulators and will be acquired by J.P. Morgan. And insuring U.S. Treasury notes against default now costs more than insuring Mexican debt, as House Republicans threaten to push the U.S. into technical default rather than give the Biden administration more room for deficit spending. What do you guys think about that one? And only time will tell if America can unite and prevail over the shadows cast by the infamous drama, or if it will continue to remain a nation on the brink, giving off a feeling of the walls closing in, closer and closer, and getting one step closer to centralized banking. And the blaring truce exposed just how costly the federal bank regulators, the Fed, FDIC, and OCC, and their decisions and actions or inability to act will go far beyond the dollar figures. And I've already started receiving emails and DMs on Instagram asking questions like, Kevin, if my bank fails and is shut down by federal regulators, will I still have to pay my loans? Will my mortgage be forgiven? Well, in essence, this banking collapse helps reassure depositors their money is still relatively safe, sort of. But in the long run, we can see how this is allowing JP Morgan to grow even bigger. The flaws within the banking resolution process are clear, and years of regulatory planning has pretty much blown right out the window. This morning, all of First Republic Bank's 84 offices in 8 states that were closed by regulators will be reopened as branches of JP Morgan Chase Bank during business hours today. JP Morgan Chase has taken over First Republic Bank, the nation's 12th largest bank after its collapse, and the banking giant will assume most of First Republic's assets and all of its depositors after JP Morgan made a bid to purchase First Republic immediately after federal regulators seized the crumbling bank and the FDIC, or the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, accepted their bid. And so now anyone with deposits at First Republic are now customers of JP Morgan. JP Morgan will take on $173 billion of loans, $30 billion of securities, and $92 billion of deposits of the failed lender that had been struggling in recent months and have lost 97% of its value this year alone. This marks the third bank rescue in the past few months following the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank that forced the Federal Reserve to take emergency measures to keep markets from taking on too much of a hit. But some fear that the damage has already been done. What do you guys think? With the effects of federal regulators and the U.S.'s decisions weighing heavily on the world throughout, and now the chairman of the State Duma Committee on the Financial Market says that an agreement on the BRICS currency can be reached in 2023, this year, as BRICS nations ramp up their de-dollarization efforts to shift away from the U.S. dollar reliance, and saying, and I quote, "By linking its economy and currency to politics, the U.S. is practically undermining the foundations of its dominance, and that I am sure that the share of the dollar in world trade will steadily decline," end quote. Meanwhile, the BRICS nations have been ramping up their de-dollarization efforts and are currently working to create a common currency that will reduce their reliance on the U.S. dollar. A new unified currency that could be backed by physical gold. And Russian officials added that now there is a search for some kind of collective currencies, emphasizing that a discussion on this topic is already on the agenda of the BRICS countries. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Oh, and many more countries submitting their applications to join the BRICS bloc as we speak. The economic bloc is pushing to expand its global influence, and Russia is actively discussing BRICS expansion with member countries. So far, a total of 24 nations have either applied to join the group or have expressed interest in joining, and know that a BRICS currency will erode the US dollar's dominance. A steadily growing and collective group of strategic alliances that will challenge the US dollar's decades-long role as the world's reserve currency. Recent newcomers include Saudi Arabia, Iran, Argentina, United Arab Emirates, Algeria, Egypt, Bahrain, Indonesia, 2 unnamed nations from East Africa, and 1 from West Africa. But the simple fact still remains, and that is that the US dollar, once the reigning superpower of global currencies, is now on the brink of demise. We are literally witnessing history happen here, folks, and currently the US dollar accounts for approximately 60% of the total value of world currencies, but this trend is rapidly changing. And the old 1970s Richard Nixon concept of backing the dollar with debt instead of ounces of gold is quickly falling apart. The mental construct is no more. People have lost faith. Oh, and the ace up America's sleeve being that of the agreement that ultimately created the petrodollar is rapidly falling apart too, as this once secret agreement between President Franklin Roosevelt and the then King of Saudi Arabia, having promised protection in exchange for the exclusive right for the US to develop oil from Saudi Arabia, would then give the US global dominance over the entire world for the last 90 years, is now being ignored by newly emerging enemies of the US and their methods of financial manipulation. Dominance and power, which has been used to cut off other countries from their life source, energy, has resulted in pure rebellion against this US dollar dominance. Maybe that's why there's such a strong push for EV in the US. And these new alliances are being formed to challenge the supremacy of the US dollar. But with great power comes great responsibility, and ongoing neglect and blatant abuse of said power can only be tolerated for so long before people realize that they have very little left to lose and begin to push back. They begin to fight back.